Okay. Want to take a look at something with you over the course of the next half hour that perhaps is a little off the beaten track for Shabuot. I'm going to put the text up on the screen. And the truth is that this text is way longer than we're going to cover. It's actually about 6 or 7, it's like something crazy, about 6 or 7 pages. So I'm going to give an introduction to it for about 5 minutes. We're going to spend about 10 minutes studying the text itself. And the rest of the time, the rest of the 15 minutes remaining are going to be a discussion about that, which I'll give an introduction to. We'll go from there. The Mishnah, as we're all familiar with the text of the Mishnah, with the existence of the Mishnah and the text of the Mishnah, which was compiled, it was not written down, but it was compiled at the beginning of the 3rd century in Beit Sharim or in somewhere in the Galil, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, was the culmination of approximately 150 years of a major project of collating the oral tradition. We're all familiar with this. What we have to keep in mind is that that project really began in earnest in Yavne. And it began in Yavne in the immediate aftermath of the Churban. And as a result of that, there are two, not conflicting, but two different agendas going on in the compilation of the Mishnah. One agenda is to put together a workable, memorizable code for people to know so they can know how to live. But you notice that the Mishnah covers many things that with the destruction of the Mikdash were at least temporarily not relevant. Another major agenda, that's what I focus on, was to maintain an oral memory of the Beit HaMikdash. Perhaps the most significant Masechet in the whole Mishnah, it's unfair to pick one out of 63, but perhaps the most significant one is a Masechet called Eduyot. Masechet Eduyot, which has no Talmud Bavli or Yerushalmi on it, is a Masechet which is exactly what it sounds like. It's testimony given by people who were present during the times of the Mikdash, who testify about what things were going on in the Mikdash. And the major reason this was significant was in Yavne, first time in Yavne, they were convinced that the Mikdash is going to be rebuilt ot-ot-ot, as we say, immediately. We're going to return to the Avodah, and we have to know how to do things. And therefore, they would collate eyewitness testimony from people who could talk about it. There is also a component of what happened in the Mishnah which idealized the period of the Mikdash. And then there's little holes in the structure that let the light in that you see things weren't as great as we think. For instance, Masechet Yoma, 8 chapters of Mishnah, which is devoted to Avodat Yom Kippurim, 7 of the chapters are about Yom Kippur in the Beit HaMikdash. The last chapter is the only one that's a practical application to us as far as halacha goes. But in those 7 chapters, it is described like an eyewitness account. The Kohen Gadol does this, and then the Kohen Gadol goes over there, and then the Kohen Gadol does this. All Kohen Gadol, by the way. And if you're standing here, you can't hear that because these two things are happening simultaneously, etc. It's described like an eyewitness watching the Avodat Beit HaMikdash on Yom Kippurim. And then there's a little crack in the armor where at the end of the first parak, for instance, it says that they had to make the Kohen Gadol take an oath that he would not deviate from the instructions of the Beit Din by 1 iota, because there was really a concern about Kohanim Gedolim who were not behaving properly. So once in a while you get this little reality slap, but otherwise it's a beautiful picture. I want to turn our attention to a small Masechet which is often ignored. It's ignored for several reasons. It is at the very end of Seder Zraim, Masechet Bikkurim. It is 3 chapters with a chapter of Braita added on. It is the first chapter is the laws of Bikkurim, pretty straightforward. The second chapter is sort of like a miscellaneous summary of Seder Zraim, the laws of Trumot and Masrot and Chala and Trumat Maser, and a lot of that put together and organized. And the third parak is the one we're going to look at. The third parak is a somewhat unique parak in Mishnah. It is a description, like an eyewitness description of the Bikkurim parade going to Yerushalayim and the process of bringing Bikkurim to Yerushalayim. Now, the parak is 12 Mishnayot. We're only going to look at 7 of them, and relatively quickly, because the first 7 really describe the process. And the way that the process is described is presented as if someone were watching it. And it's gorgeous. The question, which we cannot settle, is this really an eyewitness account? Or is this an idealized image of what it should be like? The reason I mention that is because there's a whole lot of symbolism involved in this description, which at least one great authority who commented on it, and that's where we're going to spend the second half of the shiur, suggested was symbolic and was laden with meaning about the ideal relationship of the nation to its capital city, of the nation to its own members, both in individuals and in classes. And so therefore, it could be that some of what is described here is idyllic and maybe didn't exactly happen that way, especially since for the last 100 plus years before the Churban, we could not really engage in a parade like this. We were under Roman rule for 140 years, from 69 BCE, and we didn't necessarily have the freedom to do things at this extravagant level. Nonetheless, we'll read it. So why is it in the Mishnah? It's in the Mishnah because, first of all, it's a beautiful description, but it may also be giving us a little bit of an insight into how halacha also speaks to deeper ideas. And that when we do things a particular way, it's not just the action, it's what that action has to teach us about values. All right, so that's my introduction to the Mishnah and to Bikkurim. Again, Bikkurim is not widely studied, first of all, because again, there's no Talmud Bavli on it. There is Yerushalmi. There's no Talmud Bavli on it. It's also at the end of Zraim. It's also something which is not practical. We do not bring Bikkurim today, although the secular kibbutzim turned Shabuot into a Bikkurim festival, Saleinu Al Ktefeinu, the famous song, and they would actually walk around with their new fruit. Parenthetically, the mitzvah of Bikkurim is a mitzvah that begins after Shavuot, not on Shavuot, after Shavuot. And the Mishnah in the first parak tells us that you can bring Bikkurim anytime through the summer till Sukkot, and according to one opinion, till Chanukah. And so it's during the entire harvest season. And so Shavuot, which is the beginning of wheat harvest, after that we could bring it. Shavuot is called Yom HaBikkurim in the Torah, in Bamidbar Chavchet. But it's called Yom HaBikkurim because it's the time where the very first wheat that is brought to the Mikdash, that's the first time it's brought. So wheat, which is harvested perhaps for several weeks before, cannot be brought in the Mikdash until Shavuot, when the Shtei HaLechem is brought from the brand new wheat. And that's why it's called Yom HaBikkurim. Okay, let's take a look at the Mishnah. And we'll just run through it parenthetically. If anybody's interested, I'd be happy to send you this entire source sheet, which has these Mishnayot translated into English and a lot of highlighting. As you can see, I went a little crazy with the color coding. And thank you, Vivian Hederi, for the clue on that. Okay, Ketzad Mafrishina Bikkurim. So how are Bikkurim separated? And you'll notice that although this is all a description of doing things this way and that way and that way, it's just filled with all sorts of images which are both pastoral, and are evocative, and we'll see. Ketzad mafrishina bikurim. How are bikurim separated? Yored adam betoch sadeh v'roeh te'ina shebikra, eshkol shebiker, rimon shebiker. So you find one of the, and it could be any of the shiva minim, although we don't really bring barley because it's animal food and it's also harvested before this. But whatever kind of farmer you are, at that season, you're going to bring bikurim. So if you've got fig trees, you're going to bring your figs in July. If you're a vintner, you're going to bring your grapes in September because that's when you harvest grapes, or August. So when you see the first one that started to blossom or to grow, koshro v'gemi, you tie it, a little tie on it, ve'omer hareilu bikurim. You have to declare this is bikurim. So you see a purely halachic statement. Rabbi Shimon says you have to call them bikurim again after you separate them from the ground. And the idea is this is just like all hafrashot, hafrashat chala, hafrashat truma, maaser. You have to make an oral declaration identifying this as your gift. Okay. Ketzan ma'alina ta bikurim. How do we bring the bikurim up? Kol ha'ayarot shebema'amad mitkansot la'ir shel ma'amad. Ma'amad is sort of like what we would call in the States a county seat, a local city, which is the center, the hub of the area. And the issue of ma'amadot, take a look in the fourth parak of Ta'aniyot, you'll see the discussion of ma'amadot. So all of the local cities could assume that this area is a wine area or a fig area. So they're all going to be going at the same time. All of the members of that area come in. Vilanim berchova shel ir. They sleep in the street. They do not sleep in homes. Now, there could be a practical reason. It could be there's not enough homes there. There's a halachic explanation to this, which is that they're concerned that if they're sleeping in a house, there's big once-a-year annual trip to Yerushalayim, which is so great and so festive. And if they happen to be in a house where there's tumat mate, somebody dies at night, then they're finished. So they sleep outside to be safe from that. They wouldn't come into the homes. And then in the morning, there'd be a gabbai who would get up and announce, Kumu v'na'alet Sion el beit Adonai Eloheinu. Now, this is a paraphrase of a pasuk in Yirmiyahu. In Yirmiyahu, it says, Kumu v'na'alet Sion el Hashem Elokeinu. But here, it has el beit Adonai Eloheinu. Let's go on up together. Together we're going to go. Okay. As you can see, Mishnah Gimel is the one that I'm going to focus on in the discussion afterwards. And it describes the following. And it sounds somewhat mundane. Hakrovim mivi'im ha'te'inim v'ha'anavim. So people who live near Yerushalayim, who have, let's say, a half-day walk or so, would bring figs and grapes. But people who live far away, who may be taking a multi-day journey, and it's in the summer, mivi'im grogurot v'tzimukim. They bring dried figs and raisins, right? For practical reason, because if you try to bring grapes on the road, they're going to go bad. And so they would dry them out first and bring them as dry. So imagine this parade, and there's an ox leading the parade. V'karnav mitzupot zahav. They would put a gold cover on the horns of the ox. V'ateret shel zayit birosho. And this is one ox, one amazing ox, right? The ox is walking in front of them. He's got horns that are gold plated and a olive wreath on his head. Hachalil makel lifneihem. Now the chalil is not the chalil that we know of. It's some sort of a wind percussive instrument, because the verb always used with a chalil is makeh. What's interesting is that chalil is used in two contexts in rabbinic literature. It's in the context, besides of the mikdash, it's in the context of weddings, but it's also used in the context of avelut. All right, we're going to come to that. Until they would, this parade is going on as far as they're going until they get close to Yerushalayim. Higiu karov Yerushalayim. Once they get close to Yerushalayim, which we could assume is right outside the walls, shalchu lifneihem. They sent a message into the city saying, "We're on our way. The people from Afula are here. The people from Rehovot are here." Ve'itru bikurehem, and then they would take their bikurim and then they would adorn them. And later on in the parak, in the more technical halachic place, they talk about what used for itur bikurim. Is it shivat aminim? Is it something else? And then hapachot haskanim v'gizbarim. These are all sorts of different government officials in Yerushalayim, the capital. Yotzim likratam. They would come out to greet them. Now notice what happens. The more important, or perhaps the bigger the group coming, the bigger the delegation, and more important the delegation that comes out to meet them. So there isn't a set delegation of, let's say, 3 pachot, 3 skanim, and 3 gizbarim, that every time there's a bikurim group coming, they go out. It depends who's coming. These are the very important farmers from Emek Beit Sha'an. We got a big group coming out. Here's 4 little farmers coming out from Ein Socher. All right, we'll send one guy out. Okay? And then B'chom Ba'alei Umaniyot, all of the artisans, Shib Yerushalayim. And you're walking through a city, you're walking through the streets. There are people working there. By the way, this is happening all summer. So if you're in Yerushalayim all summer, you got this coming. That's, by the way, good for the economy of Yerushalayim. People are coming in, they're staying there, they have to stay overnight in Yerushalayim. So there's lots of that kind of commercial interaction. Whenever the parade passes by, let's say you're a metal worker, you have to stand up, turn around, and greet them and say, Achenu anshe hamakom ploni, plug in, of course, the real name, Batem L'Shalom. So if the people from Bikat Ein Socher show up, you would turn around and say, Achenu Anshe Bikat Ein Socher Batem L'Shalom. Beautiful. Just finish the description quickly because I want to go back to that Mishnah. Hachalil Makel Ifreim Ad Shebigin Har Bayit. So they're walking through the streets of the city till they get to Har Bayit. Now remember, if we're talking about Ir David, they're going uphill now. Higiu lahar habayit. Once they get to Har Bayit, afilu Agrippas hamelach notel hasal al ktefo v'nichnas. Agrippas hamelach was one of the Roman prefects who was the king over Judea towards the very end in the first century, and he happened to be very much beloved by the Chachamim, and he accepted certain practices, even of a citizen, not a king. And he would take the basket and put it on his shoulder, but everybody puts their basket on the shoulder. Ad shemagia la azara, till you get up to the azara, the courtyard of the mikdash. Higia la azara v'dibru al v'yim b'shir. Then the Levim would start singing. So you can imagine the Levim are on duty all summer, and they're ready to start singing, and they're singing Psalm 30. Why that's the appropriate song for this event is a shir on that parak, and more than 15 minutes. So they would have birds on top of the shalim. Those would be korbanot. And odeo asal al tefo, while the thing was still on the basket, koremi, he got it to ayom. And then it describes what parts they would read. Machlokot Rabbi Yudin Chachamim, what part would be read. One last halacha, which is an interesting divide between Sfaradim and Ashkenazim in this, you'll see. Originally, anybody who knew how to make the declaration would say it. Arami Oved Avi Vayir Mitzrayma. Anybody who didn't know it, they would cue him. So what happened is people were embarrassed. They didn't want to come because they were embarrassed that they couldn't do the reading. So they made a rule that they cue it for everybody. And it's, even if you knew how to read it, they cued it for you. This, by the way, led to the Ashkenazi custom of having a Baal Kriya read Torah for everybody, even somebody who came up who knows how to read. I know that that's not the minhag in your community. I know because when I'm there, I get to read my aliyah. It's great. It's a lot of fun. But in the Ashkenazi, and it's based on that, they don't want to embarrass people who don't know how to do their own reading. Of course, in your community, you have way more people who do, which is one of the reasons I love visiting. Okay. Quick introduction. Rav Avram Yitzhak HaKohen Cook, who I'm sure you've all heard of, who was born in 1865 and served in the rabbinate. He was an Ilui. He studied in Volozhin. He was, and he had a rabbinate in the town of Boysk in Lithuania before making Aliyah in 1904 to become the chief rabbi of Tel Aviv, Yafo, really Yafo, and held that position until he was then named as the chief Ashkenazi rabbi of Israel until his passing in 1935. Rav Kook wrote voluminous material, but as many of you are aware, material that's very, very inaccessible, very difficult, very abstract. His language is heavily poetic and hard sometimes to discern the difference between this term and that term and what his reference is. However, early in his career, while he was still in Europe, he began a project of writing a commentary on the Agadot in the Gemara. And he wrote this commentary on all of Masachet Brachot, on the first half of Masachet Shabbat, and on a few other sections, including our chapter of Bikkurim. It is an amazing commentary. If you can get all, it's online. It's called Ein Ayah. Ein Ayah, you can see the title there on the page. And I want to show you just a few selections from Mishnah Gimel, which again is what I love this parak in Bikkurim, and I love his commentary on it. And perhaps some of that will come through. But where this is where it's clear that at least Rav Kook looked at the events described in this Mishnah as being heavily symbolic. Whether that means that they actually happened and they happened because of the symbolism involved, or they were envisioned that way, not our concern. Concern is what the message is. And so he starts by talking about it. I'm going to review this outside of the text. I'm looking at the clock. And I know that it's almost 9:30 where you folks are. But I'll discuss it outside of the text, and you can follow it here. And again, anybody who's interested, just ask Jesse. I'll send him the text, and he could send you a copy of the whole thing. He starts with the mention that says that, and which sounds like a very mundane thing, which is the people who live near Yerushalayim would bring grapes and figs, and the people who live further away would bring dried figs and raisins. So he goes on to say that the grapes and figs represent fresh, moist, lively things, whereas the raisins are something that is dried up and doesn't have its freshness. And yet, he points out, the dried up raisins have staying power that the grapes don't have. Grapes, you leave them out for a couple of days, they go bad. The raisins can last forever. And he then compares this to two different kinds of relationship to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, what he calls Koach HaTorah and Koach HaNevuah. And he refers to Koach HaNevuah as that emotional connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which creates a passion and a liveliness and an excitement and an ardor. But of course, it's the sort of thing that if it's not constantly stoked, can easily pass. On the other hand, Koach HaTorah is much more didactic, much more analytic. It's a little drier. It has staying power. And then he takes the next leap. And he says, Koach HaTorah is exactly what exile created for us. Being distant from Eretz Yisrael, the place of our passion, the place of prophecy, the place of excitement, meant that we got engaged, and he writes about this at length in his meta-historic essay, The Malach HaIdiot Yisrael. It got us engaged, and it was a necessary step for those 1,500 years or 2,000 years. It got us engaged in the study of Torah in its halachic nuances and the details and the analytic splits and conceptual analysis, which all have the power to stay forever. They can be a little less exciting. They can be a little less dramatic, a little less passionate. You cannot imagine at a Su'udah Shlishit or a Havdalah that's run by our youth groups, somebody getting up to inspire kids and talk to them about two different ways to understand what Eidim Zomim is. That would be silly. When we want to inspire people, we talk about a story, we talk about a personal reflection about, this past week we celebrated Yom Yerushalayim, we tell stories about the brave Chayalim. We do that. And so therefore he says that the Koach HaTorah is the Koach that we really got for those thousands of years in Chutz La'aretz when we didn't have the close connection to the land. Koach HaNevuah is what happens in the land. And you think about it, we've seen this so much that when people come to Eretz Yisrael, connect to Eretz Yisrael, they seem to broaden and deepen, they certainly do broaden and deepen their relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but there's a certain passion and a fire that you see in Eretz Yisrael that you see much less of in Chutz La'aretz. And at the end, he says something which is just such a mind-blowing statement. He says, Uman na'eh ha'machazeh lir'ot shebetzion Michlal Yofi. And right, he's watching this happen in his day because he's alive during the second Aliyah already. He's in Israel. And during the wave of Aliyah that happened after World War I, after San Remo. Uman na'eh ha'machazeh lir'ot shebetzion Michlal Yofi Sham alu shvatim, borrows from Tehillim, ucheshevet achim gam yachad, yitkabtzu yachad klalei upratei baalei atchunot hashonot. Says, look how beautiful it is that in Sion, in this Michlal Yofi, pasuk in Tehillim Memchet, the gathering of beauty, that all of the tribes come, meaning that they come with the different approaches, the different abilities, the different relationships. V'chol echad, and this is the kicker, yakir b'pu'ulat re'eu atova u'poriyah. And this, of course, is what in many cases we're still missing. That everybody recognizes the value of what the other guy's doing. Af shehi rechoka mitchunato u'michalko aprati. And he says that's kind of the idea of the pasuk in Yeshayahu, shalom shalom la'rachok v'la'karov. Now, just for 1 second, we'll see what Rav Kook did here. He took a mundane Mishnah that describes raisins versus grapes, and he turns the grapes into a beautiful wine. He takes the symbolism of it, and he identifies a real sociological thing that exists in his day at the beginning of the 20th century in Israel, as there are people who have been there for several generations, and there are people who are just off the boat, and people who have come to Israel because they are the product of generations of Talmud in Chutz La'aretz, of the kind of religious depth and analysis and study that typifies the yeshivot of the 19th century in Europe. And they come off the boat and they come to the land where the people who are there have this passion. And he says to picture that not only these people could pray together and could live together in one community, but could value what the other person brings to the table. What a beautiful image. And that's part of the reason why Rav Kook looks at this whole Mishnah, this whole description, as a picture of the ideal community, that the figs and the dried figs, the raisins and the grapes can sit together and be valued together. We have time for maybe two more comments. The next line in the Mishnah describes Hashor holech lifneim, v'karnav mitzupot zahav, v'terah shel zayit birosho. So he points out that the symbolism of this, of course, is he says that a nation which its entire focus is just about work on its own, in other words, that's its own value, that's one thing. But a nation that has an idealistic bent, that its entire focus is about a vision, is going to see work, hard work, as a value which gets you somewhere, which is, and I'll read the highlighted part, Omnam ha'osher lo yeh mechuvan la'atzmo, ki im kedei sha'al yado tavo la'ir et atzma v'et ha'olam b'orach chochma v'dea ha'amitit. The nation understands that by doing hard work, and remember, he's talking here, even though he wrote this earlier, he was there, he watched, he remember did the famous tour of the kibbutzim. He watched as Israeli agricultural production, pre-Israeli agriculture, Palestinian agricultural production became a minor miracle. And he said that this hard work, they understand, was only there in order to be able to then impress upon the world the real message we have, which is, that's why the first thing that walks is the ox. That's the hard work. But the ox has gold-plated horns, because the idea is that the hard work should actually bring us wealth, to bring us power into the world, but that power has to be about sharing wisdom. And that's why on top there is a wreath of olive branches, because the olive branches and olive oil continually, from Mishlei on through our Midrashic tradition, always symbolizes wisdom, the light of wisdom. And therefore, the ox, the hard work, on top of its head is gold-plated, because the point of the work is to reach power. And on top of that is an olive branch, because the point of the power is to bring light into the rest of the world. And then he addresses the Chalil. And this is something that in retrospect, remember, Rav Kook died in 1935, but in retrospect, when you look at the worst horror that we ever experienced, and we're still living in the shadow of it, which is the Shoah, and we look at the culture that was able to reach such depths, such terrible depths of Nazi Germany, which on the one hand was this very high culture and devoted to the arts and to music and to literature. So he addresses this, of course, presciently, and he says, these three things which help the nation succeed, which is the hard work, the wealth, and the intelligence, the wisdom that they want to share, all have the potential to lead to ruin. That's what he says. And therefore, the Chalil, which reminds us of mourning, remember Chalil was used for mourning, goes in front of them. And therefore, that reminder will help them stay focused that all of this wisdom and everything that they're bringing to the table has to be focused towards a godly purpose, an elevated purpose, which helps the entire world, as opposed to something that could lead to ruin. He goes on, and again, if you'd like a copy of this, I'm happy to send it. It's already 9:30 and it's time to go. But I hope that over the course of the last half hour, we've had an opportunity to maybe see something new and to maybe see something old in a new light. I want to wish everybody a Chag Sameach, and everybody should stay healthy. And I hope to see all of you soon in Brooklyn and Deal, and ideally in Yerushalayim. Chag Sameach.